So, are you curious about what an offer actually looks like? Real estate contracts are complex. There's a lot of legal jargon, numbers, and blank spaces to understand. They can be quite difficult for your average consumer. And when you're already going through the massive big haul of purchasing a home, this can feel like one of those big extra steps that can feel stressful. So today I'm actually going to break down a real purchase and sale agreement that I've worked on before. It's been fully redacted so that you can understand what the key terms are that are important to know should you be interested in buying or selling in the future. My name is Madyson Arthur. I'm a local real estate broker here in Seattle, helping buyers and sellers find the right fit throughout the region. This video is targeted towards my current clients, but also those who might be looking to buy soon. So I'm looking at the contract on my iPad, so I'll be looking down here, and then I'll put the contract up on the screen right here so that you can see it. This very first page is the bread and butter of your contract, otherwise known as a purchase and sale agreement. This is the contract that you give the seller when you're ready to purchase a home that details all of the fundamentals about your purchase price, your terms, all of the above. Okay, so let's just go line by line. So first off, your first few lines, 1 through 4, are the basics. Dates, client names, seller names, the property. Number 5 is included items. This will detail anything in addition to the property that you would like with your purchase. So think stoves, ranges, refrigerators, all of that typically stays, so we have to outline that in the contract. Number 6, this is your purchase price. I have redacted this and slightly changed the purchase price just for privacy reasons. Now, line 7, this is called your earnest money deposit. This is a refundable security deposit that you provide the sellers with that you will get back at closing to put towards, your down payment costs, closing costs, whatever it may be. The Seattle market number sort of varies. It's typically 2 to 5% of the purchase price, depending on how competitive the situation is. So if there's a lot of offers on the table, you might provide more earnest money. If you're in a more non-competitive situation, you might offer less. Let's say you decide to back away from the contract without a legal reason. This money will go to the sellers and you won't get it back. So it's essentially the collateral that you have in terms of making your offer. And you have to typically deposit it between 3 to 5 business days in our market to the seller after you have written and had your offer accepted, which is what we call mutual acceptance, and I'll probably be saying that word a lot today. So moving down to line 8, this details exactly what will happen should you back out of the contract, like I mentioned. So let's say you just decided you didn't want the home anymore and you didn't have an addendum protecting you, which is line 20, something we'll be talking a little bit more about. Then that earnest money will be forfeited to the seller. You can also choose to have your own election of remedies, but this is one of the things that we do to avoid, legal issues and lawsuits. It's the easiest way to go about this. But the goal is to never have to run into this problem. So let's move on to lines 9 and 10. These are essentially your closing brokers and agents. Your title company and escrow company will come into play sort of after you've written your offer, and they manage the transfer of ownership and money between the seller and the buyer. And they kind of take the center stage as you move through the process after finding the property of your choosing. When it comes to the title and escrow companies, they can be 2 different companies, but are often the same, at least in this market. And it's nice to note that typically the seller chooses who they would like to use. Moving to line 11, this is of course your closing date and then possession date. Line 12 is explicitly stating that you would like assistance getting all of the utilities prorated ahead of closing by your third-party closing broker. Line 13 is sort of similar. This is talking about the proration of your bills and anything tied to the property, because what will happen is between a buyer and the seller, everything is prorated so that you only make payments after closing on the time that you own the property. Line 14 we'll talk a little bit about later, but there is a tax imposed on sellers who are not U.S. citizens, and that is just disclosing if the seller is a U.S. citizen or not. Line 15 is regarding a resale certificate. This is essentially all of the HOA documents affiliated with a certain condo. I chose a condo purchase and sale agreement for this video because they are a little bit more complex than a single family home in this regard, and I wanted to make sure that we touched on them. But essentially, if you do have a condo that you're interested in purchasing, you'll want to review all of the HOA documents, and this checkbox is just asking the seller to provide us with those documents and how much time they have to do so. Now, oftentimes they'll provide them with you before you write an offer, but we always add the extra time in case some of the documents are outdated, and so that's why we have that there. And then line 16, this is just detailing exactly what the HOA monthly association dues are, should you have an HOA due. And at closing, you typically pay, 1 to 3 months of that fee just ahead of time. Line 17 is called the information verification period. This is just an extra protection of time in place for the buyer to verify that all things are true and accurate regarding the property that they're interested in. And then line 18 is just disclosing that the elected buyer broker represents the buyer and the elected seller/listing broker represents the seller. And line 19, this is important. The way that real estate works here in Washington at the time is that us brokers agree with our buyer clients what our fee is. Now we place this in the box that says amount to be paid by the seller, and then the line A, which is seller's offer of compensation, is what the seller is providing. So sometimes these fees can be the same and sometimes they can be different, but at the end of the day, the seller is who ultimately pays for the buyer broker, but the buyer broker fee is set by the buyer. So sometimes the buyer may have to come up with an additional amount to pay, and other times it will be fully covered by the seller. Okay, so line 20 is a very important part of the contract. These are what is called addenda. They are additional documents affiliated with the offer, and these are listed here so the seller can see exactly what components are part of the offer in one concise list. When it comes to all of these addendas, what's important to talk a little bit about are contingencies. Contingencies are forms that you add to your offer that allow you more time to further investigate or research the home, and they also allow you to back out of the property with no issues. You will get your earnest money back. They essentially allow you the ability to verify that this really is the property that you want before you really have to commit to closing and buying it. So we're going to break down each of the contingencies involved with this specific contract. Okay, so right now we're looking at the financing addenda. This is a contingency that allows the buyer additional time to verify and confirm their financing. So let's say their financing falls through for a reason outside of their control, then the buyer can back out, no problems asked, without having to forfeit their earnest money deposit. Baked into this contract, you will see that they have 21 days to do this. Now, the reason that we've selected seller's notice to perform is that it allows the buyer just a few extra days in the case that something has gone awry. Otherwise, you can also hit line B, which is the automatic waiver of financing, which just means that if 21 days passes and nothing happens, then the financing contingency has been deemed waived. Moving to page 2, line 3, this is what's called your loan cost provisions. But to break it down, this particular client, they had an FHA loan, as you can see, and they didn't have a ton of upfront cash to go ahead and purchase the property. So what they wanted to do was get the seller to pay for all of that upfront money needed to close in the home. We call these your closing costs. They were able to get the seller to pay for $20,000, meaning they got all of their closing costs completely paid for. I think they ended up paying $500 total to purchase the home, or something along those lines, just to pay for things like an inspection. So line 3 is essentially asking the seller to pay for some of your closing costs. Now that number can really vary depending on the level of competition, the purchase price of the home, the seller's motivation, all of the above. But this is a really great tool to use if you're interested in bringing less cash up front, but also if you want to do something like a rate buy down. Here you could have the seller cover that and get a lower interest rate if you need a lower monthly payment. And something that a lender and real estate broker can work together to really help you find the best plan. So we're now going to move to page 10, which is your optional clauses addenda. Now, this is, as you'd expect, optional, but very important in a form that I always include. So line 1 is talking about the square footage, lot size, and encroachments. This is just a protection in place to make sure that the sellers verified all information is true and accurate about the property. Line 3 is seller cleaning. I always like to include this for my buyers because it's nice to have that extra reassurance that the home's in good condition when you move in. Same kind of goes for line 4, which is your personal property. This is just stating that the seller needs to remove anything from the home that's not wanted by the buyer. Line 5, this is your utilities. Now we have the Form 22K in place, which we'll discuss, but it just verifies that all of the key utilities are connected in good operating condition tied to the home. So those are all important, but what's really important about the optional clauses addendum is line 8. This is the Homeowners Association review period. So this is a protection and a contingency in place allowing the buyer to review the HOA documents in full. Now, I'll often suggest that you hire a professional. There are actually professional HOA specialists who can review all of these documents for you because they can be quite large. I've seen HOA packages that are hundreds and hundreds of pages, and they're difficult to understand. But really what they are is a breakdown of the condo's financial health, rules and regulations, history, board and leadership members, all of the things to understand if not just the unit is a good investment, but the building itself. So very important for a condo, and one of the reasons I wanted to do a condo for this video because you won't typically see these in traditional single family homes. So that of the optional clauses pages is what I find to be the most important. Okay, so now we are at the Form 22K. This is your identification of utilities. This is just verifying with the seller that upon closing that you're going to have all of your utilities connected and you're going to be able to have all of the companies to easily connect with them. So if it's a single family home, it might be individual names and companies. If it is a condo, you might find that the HOA covers everything that you need. Alright, so next on our list is the 22T title contingency. This is a form that allows you in X amount of days to verify the history of ownership of the property. So what this allows you to do is to confirm if there are any property taxes that haven't been paid, encroachments influencing your ability to own the home free and clear, and anything that might impact your ownership. So it's very important to verify, and you will be receiving what's called a title report. So this is a document going through all of these types of topics. Alright, so the next addenda on our list is the most important, and that's your inspection contingency. Similar to the title, you'll see on this page that the buyer had 5 days to conduct an inspection. So what happens is you have a professional inspector go out to the home. They look at every major system, including, heating and cooling, electrical, water, everything. And they'll tell you if it's in good working condition. Now, this can happen sometimes before you write an offer, but in this instance, the buyer procured one themselves, the seller did not, and they had 5 days written into their contract to investigate the home's condition. Now, what's important to know about an inspection contingency is that you have a few different options after you've gotten one done. So here are kind of what they are. 1, you can waive the inspection contingency should the home be in good working condition. 2, you can ask the seller for money to make repairs that you'd like or adjustments. 3, you can ask the seller directly to make repairs. So let's say there's a little bit of mold in the attic. Well, you might ask the seller to remove the mold and remediate the situation ahead of closing. And 4, you can always walk away from the transaction entirely. So those are our 4 most common ones. However, there are some instances where the inspector himself can't verify certain pieces of information, so he might refer you to a specialist. So, for example, I recently had an electrician come out because the inspector couldn't fully verify the health of the electrical. And so an electrician came out, verified that it was in good working condition, but to do that, we requested 3 additional days in our inspection contingency. So, what I mean to say is you can also ask for more time. So those are kind of the 5 different ways you go about an inspection. Alright, so now we are moving to page 16. This is the form 22E, which is FERPTA. This is essentially just verifying, as mentioned earlier, if the seller is a foreign person or not. Otherwise, there's an additional tax imposed. So pretty simple. And then we've now moved to the next page, 17, which is form 17. And this is called your seller disclosure statement. Now, this document is essentially a checkbox of everything that the seller knows about the home. Now, this is really nice to review because it will help you further investigate certain things. So you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt because the seller doesn't necessarily have to answer these correctly. It's only to their best knowledge. But you could review and see, oh, maybe it looks like the roof was done a while ago and the house is leaked. Maybe this means that I need to talk to the inspector about verifying these particular things about the home and the roof. Now, the last page of the document is called your legal description. This is the real address of your home. So it just verifies that the ownership is being transferred from one person to another with the legal title documented. And after that, that really is your offer. Once you've gone into mutual acceptance and your offer has been accepted, go through all of your timelines and make sure that you know when your earnest money is going to be deposited, when your inspection deadline is, when your financing deadline is, and all of these check boxes that you're going to have to verify before closing day. And that is really our job, so that's something we can help you with. But that is really the bread and butter, the most important components of an offer. If you want to learn a little bit more about the entire home buying process, I have a video linked above that walks you through everything from just starting to look at homes to closing to things to look into, but I just wanted to have a sit-down video where I walk through what an offer really looks like because I think it's a super helpful thing to understand and sort of break down so that you feel really confident when it's time to write an offer. So I'll see you for the next one. Thanks so much. If you have any questions, comment them down below. Once again, my name is Madyson Arthur.